just wanted to look through.
No, I understood that. No, that was to go with my schedule. Oh, if you want to send the slides, that's fine.
Yes.
If you want to give the talk, that's different.
I'm when I'm nervous, don't forget, I just roll over the. So I'm not worried about that. See something people might not like, but are we in that one?
No, this is NVO3.
Oh, I'm in the wrong place. Okay.
Yeah.
No, it is someplace
All right,
else.
and you can go for calories before it's too late.
I'm sending, I'll send it to you, Matthew. Sorry? Yes, please. All right, thank you.
Still haven't response from. Still haven't response from David whether he will be here. He's entitled. So basically, I have to look at response. All I will cover. We'll do that.
I did, you never said your slide.
I'm just about, almost finished. This is, oh, this is great.
Okay, I just want to make sure you didn't forget, so just.
You're gonna be up on laptop in the next hour?
I will.
Good.
I don't have a slide, but I'm more than happy to make that. I think it's your. So, did you open the yeah. I think so.
I haven't looked at response from him yet. Maybe he will attend.
Yeah. 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Hey, how are you doing? I always listen to this, tell me about
So I just ran into her here and she wants us to do a consensus call in the room now on draft note.
If she wants, fine. But are we ready? Have people read the updated document? But we need to ask whether people have read the updated document. How many of them have read?
No, it's on the principle of adopting draft note. Oh,
I think it is adopted. It's wouldn't be
No, sorry. It's a principle of the design team recommendation to. That's a,
Well, I think that's the word for design team, not for say we or the
well, anyway.
discussion.
Yeah, I have an issue. No, I'm going to have to. No, let's do this. We just set up the.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for it.
Well, I've never had the experience.
Because in my school, but
Well, the only thing I've heard us about is.
I just listen to you.
So far,
But you've got a thing that's
there's actually, there's several doctors, there's several. So yeah, and that's all we might want.
Do you want to do something?
Why must it then releasing the
We'll upload pencils to the data tracker.
So David doesn't have.
Yes, I'm uploading it. Yes, please, if you could let them upload. Thank you. Yeah, take those.
I need 2 pens.
That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome back to NVO3, to our second session. So here's the note well again. I'll just leave that on the at the front for a minute, second or two. Okay, blue sheets are going around, and we have a JavaScribe. Thank you. And Ignis is doing the minutes, I hope. Okay, so our agenda now is just the administration. Then we're going to have a 45-minute session on the feedback from the roundtable sessions that we had last time, hopefully from the topic leaders. So on the data plane, control plane, and security. I think you may be doing. Are you going to do the? So John Hudson will do the security feedback. Thanks, John. As unfortunately Daniel couldn't make it. And then I wanted to spend a little bit of time on our next steps in the working group. Okay. Okay, so first is Sami. Okay, for the data plane roundtable feedback.
Yes, this is roundtable discussions that we had on Tuesday. So we gathered the feedback, and the point of the feedback in the following slides. So the points of discussions that we had was the data plane here was on OEM, fragmentation, the need of critical bits, security extension, and single TLV option length. So for OEM, we had actually a long discussion on OEM with Greg and the other folks, and that we discussed the 2 flavor of OEM here, what's called active OEM or in-band OEM, or sorry, active OEM is the mechanism by which we are going to be sending in the tunnel only the OEM packet. So the original data packet is not going to be included with the OEM packet. With the OEM header, or the OEM, the payload of the packet will only be OEM inside the tunnel. And in here, given that the OEM want to be in what we call in-band, meaning follow the same fate as a potential data package that will be sent over the tunnel, then we want to use the same entropy. So on the tunnel, we can use the source UDP port, same source UDP port that a data packet will carry as well. However, where it falls short here, if the entropy that's going to be computed by the transit node is not going to be taken from the tunnel UDP header, but rather from the payload itself. So, so we discussed those points, and as well, we discussed, the need of the O-bit, whether an O-bit is needed here or not, because I think some of the things that's being done OEM is defining a new protocol for OEM itself. So a new Ether type. As you folks know, Genève carries a protocol type as well in the base header. So in here, there were discussion on that too. And we discussed as well the other flavor of OEM, which is hybrid OEM, which what we refer to in our document as in-band OEM. And in there, we as well discussed the different in-band TLVs that can be included. But here in that flavor, this will be included with original payload or data packet. And that won't share the other issue of the entropy calculation if it's going to be taken from the payload. Yeah, Greg, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, you know, I apologize to everybody who was in the discussion. I missed to ask for one more type of OEM. It's alternative marking method. And if we take certain consideration and do work in encapsulation, it can work and enable us do effectively passive performance measurement on a packet. So effectively what it does, it uses bit field, 1 or 2 bits in a header. We have already proposal in a beer working group, so I can refer to this document that explains how to do it. And it will be very good if NVO encapsulation has 2 bits that does not, the value of the field does not affect the forwarding decision of the packet, the treatment of the packet. So then we can use it, mark it, and then test points can use the marks and then do the measurements and generate measure packet loss, latency, and jitter. So there is a work being done in IP performance metrics group. The base document is getting close to the working group last call. There was a discussion earlier this week. And again, there is already one document that demonstrates how it can be done in overlay in a beer group.
Sure, if you can send us the reference, would be great.
Tal Mizrahi Marvel. Actually, Greg has a good point. I think it was mentioned in the previous IETF meeting as well. And if we get rid of the O bit, you can actually use that bit for this purpose. So I think that would be, I think that's a good idea. Okay, yeah, sure. So if you can send us the reference, we are gonna consider that in the next update of the map. Okay. So OEM, yes, was a long subject to discuss. Second subject was fragmentation. So actually, in the discussion, the discussion was about how can we avoid fragmentation, right? Not really entertain it. So one thing that was mentioned is that maybe we can follow, you know, other architecture, especially the POE architecture. And I put the reference here for the POE architecture and the section in that architecture that talks about the recommendation of fragmentation or how to avoid fragmentation. So this was the fragmentation part of the discussion. Next, we discussed the need of the critical bits. There were discussion on that even on the mailing list on whether some of the option that will be carried on the packet will not be critical for the other tunnel endpoint. So meaning some of them will be optional, or maybe the other tunnel endpoint will not need to understand those options. So we had some discussion as well on that, and we are going to be considering that in the next update of the design team in CapDraft.
Security extension, there were some discussion on that too, about what kind of recommendation we could add as well to the Geneva draft, or given that the design team in CAP draft put recommendation for Geneva here. So should we add a recommendation for security in general? Or should the base header at least be secured? And what should be the recommendation, even if we are going to be hashing or computing a hash for a subset of the TLV, should that as well be put in the recommendation or not? Then finally, we discussed the single TLV option length. We had some discussion on that too. And the idea here was to align with as well other protocols or other protocols that define extension header, like NSH or even IPv6. So there was discussion about extending the size of a single option length to align with those. But I think the argument as well was that if we align, then we need to align other protocols too. So that could be as well a discussion with NSH if we want to align with IPv6 extension header length. So our TLV currently can go up to 128 bytes, and the discussion was about extending that to 256 bytes. So those were the point of discussion. I'll go back to the first slide maybe. Sorry. That we discussed. Those were the points of discussion and the inputs that we collected, the feedback we collected from everyone. Any questions?
Ilago Ganga, Intel. So I have a comment on the OAM bit. One of the reasons OAM bit is there, it helps the hardware that doesn't parse the options to look at the OAM bit and forward it to the control function that handles the OAM frames, and rather than putting it along the data path. So that's one advantage of having the bit in there.
Sure. Hi, Greg Mirsky. The thing is that having OAM bit and a protocol field creates ambiguity, in my view. Okay. Again, I'm not saying that we need to remove OAM bit. I'm just asking, let's give unambiguous definition of what OAM packet is.
Yeah, another comment about the protocol field is now you need to define a new protocol called OAM, and then to define whatever the ether type is, and then bring it in here. And if you wanted to have an OAM frame, and also you want to have a payload, that's what you are described as a hybrid model, then that other protocol needs to have a provision for next protocol field in it. And so it creates, additional complexity. Maybe you can come up with a proposal on how how the OAM frame.
Okay, because I sacrificed my 10 minutes in the first meeting for the sake of the community, but I can tell you that OAM header does have next protocol field proposed, so it does address exactly your scenario. So what we propose. I think the slides will be in the material, so you can look at it, but exactly what you say. So we have an answer for what you're saying.
Okay.
I think your answer is the problem, because if you are going to have ether type and you want to use the OAM also for a regular data packet, this is violate what we are doing in the design team.
Let's use clear terminology. I'm not planning to use OAM for data packet. Data packet has its own protocol type. But if we're using hybrid OAM, yes, OAM header can handle hybrid OAM.
So this is a problem because this is the reason why we use Geneva, because we want to skip options with the lengths, and this is a violation of the protocol. It's from my point of view.
Again, OEM header has a length which is length of OEM message, and skip OEM message is not a problem.
What's going to be the length of the packet, the total length of the packet? What is going to be?
The length in the packet will be described by NVO3 header, because NVO3 header will include all the payload. It will include OEM length and the length of the payload.
This is not good.
Eric, no, I'm not sure that anybody else in the room is know what you guys are talking about. But, so maybe I should.
You want us to take out in the corridor?
No, but up leveling, right? I mean, I think that if you look at the different formats, there's when we talk about OEM, there could be one packet which is a pure OEM packet that has an OEM protocol type, right? For some OEM functions that make sense, right? So instead of the payload being IP, it's OEM, right? And then there's another one where we talked about with these bits for marking, right? Which is basically a packet that might not have any special payload. It's just those bits, I think. No. Or it has some other pieces as well. Okay. But then the thing that comes in, I don't know if we're calling it hybrid, but the notion that I can attach some OEM information to a data packet flowing through the network. What's the encoding for that? And is there only one encoding? And I think that one thing that we talked in the design team about potentially using the extensions for is that type of thing where you say, okay, I'm having some OEM information that I want to attach to an existing data packet flowing through the network. And that, if you put that in there, so one way is doing that using an extension. The other way of doing that is putting in an OEM payload in the packet that is followed by a regular data payload, right? By having a type field there. And I think, so that's what you guys are comparing, those two choices, right? Just to make it clear.
Eric, thank you. So the bits that I mentioned is they go on a clear data packet. So, but yeah, likely nothing else.
Just to make sure again what is the claim here. The reason that we choose, Geneva or GU was, the candidate for the encapsulation protocol that we have in the base header. We have lengths that middle box that don't want to pass the OEM, don't want to pass any option, can pass on the option and go directly to the direct packet. This is the reason that we skip GPE as an option to the encapsulation. Now we take it back with this header, with this new protocol, and et cetera, et cetera. This is my.
I guess I don't see the reason why we need a new header when we've got extensions, why we can't use extensions for OAM and handle it like any other extra information we put.
Okay, one of the things why it's proposed this way is that we have beer which uses a fixed length header, and we're trying to create OEM as a common OEM for overlay networks.
But beer doesn't have extension, right?
Yes, beer doesn't have extensions. Beer uses a fixed length header.
So this is why you need bits in the header, right? But
no. Bits in the header is different reasoning. Bits in the header, they're used as a mark, and marking. Okay, I don't want to go into details of the marking method, but no, that's the reason why there is an OEM header. Because OEM header, what it does, it creates an associated OEM channel.
But we have a different framework here and different infrastructure, right?
Relate 8 byte, the unnecessary 8 byte for every protocol for the NVO3 as well, because of beer, right?
Okay. Because you still have multiplicity of OEM functions, and you still need these functions to be identified, and OEM header does multiplexing, demultiplexing without any bother for NVO3 or any other overlay protocol.
Okay, I'm going to let George and Pat speak,
I just
think,
have
and
a
then cut it
comment
off there.
I have a comment just for clarification. The bits in the header are, essentially, most common use would be to, if the bit's set, click that counter. If it's not set, click that counter when you're counting packets and bytes, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should use the mechanism we built into this for extensions and not have to understand another header and understand a different way of parsing things. And
we are going to be discussing all those anyway as we are progressing as well, the design team in CapDraft. Right?
I mean, I would agree with Pat as well, because if you look at, if this is deployed, right, we're likely to have functions that want to look at the payload in the middle of the network because they want to do firewalls and whatever. And having one way where they could, whether there's OEM data attached to the packet or there's some other security tag, whatever, right, handwave attached to the packet, the way they skip past that to look at the TCP headers inside is the same, right? It seems simpler than saying that OEM is going to be slightly different. And then saying, how can we take the same OEM headers that are being defined for BR and put them inside an extension, right?
It's a different mechanism. They are different mechanisms, so we should not break our mechanism, right?
Tal Mizrahi, it seems to me like there are two separate questions here, which in some moments it looked like it's the same question. But actually one question is, do we want the OEM to be a TLV or a separate shim header? And the other question is, do we need the OBIT? And we need to separate these two questions, and they're possibly different issues.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks very much. So I think the plan is to update the design team draft with some of these considerations.
Yeah, this is the plan. So we are going to be, the design team is given that they are the co-author of the design team in CapDraft, so we are going to be meeting to discuss those points and update the draft accordingly and bring it up to the list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Benson.
Thank you. So, we had a roundtable discussion yesterday, and I tried to put some slides together to capture it. I'm sure there are some problems with them, so people who were in that conversation, just yell at me, at the mic preferably. So we did have a discussion breakout at IETF 97 in Seoul. I actually managed to find the pictures of the it's not a whiteboard, a flip pad that we used back then. It turns out that they're actually documented. That's better. Turns out that they're actually documented in those slides. So if you actually care to look at them, they're in the old materials from that meeting. There were a few things we talked about then that we touched on not yesterday, 2 days ago here. One of those things is this notion of what a control plane is, let's say as distinct from a management plane. In the notes we had in the 97 breakout session, there's also some discussion about discovery and where that fit. I didn't actually try to document any conclusions about that, but just to point out that we did make those, have that discussion last time. And it sort of carried over into the discussion yesterday, 2 days ago, sorry. So the topic was control plane, and in particular, we were asked to talk about implementations of control plane protocols that might apply to the NVO3 problem. Of course, the NVO3 problem is documented in the architecture and framework documents. We have requirements drafts, which are effectively a year old, whatever. They've been expired for a long time. And when we allowed them to expire, the idea was that we would pick them up again when we had work on solutions. So we may be at the point where we need to do that again, but for your reference, there they are. I'll point out the second little cluster of text there is talking about the split NVE control plane. And Pat is sitting right here. If anyone wants to review the IEEE document, I'm pretty sure she would be happy. In fact, I'll let her say something.
Let me make, let me make that much stronger. Please do. We, the NVO3 working group, has asked IEEE to please extend this protocol. We need to review it to see if it works for us. Otherwise, it will be harder to ask other places to extend protocols kindly for us in the future. And the question really that comes out if we don't provide adequate review is, do we need this or do they punt it? It's your decision if you don't review it. Thank you.
And somebody asked me, what kind of review are we looking for? Obviously, we'd love to have people read the whole document and tell us any comments they have. Our editors have included some of the surrounding clause material, so you should be able to read that draft without having to go back and look at what's in the standard a whole lot. It should make sense as it is. But if you have limited time, I think the thing we most need feedback on, and you'll let me know if I'm leaving anything out. The thing we most want feedback on is whether we've included the right data in the extensions of the TLVs. So if you don't look at anything else, look at that. It's only that part's only a few pages. Yeah, there's 2 clauses in there, but that part's only a few pages. There's also some information on marking whether the port is migrating or not, and so that probably is another area to look at. So I'd say if you focus on those 2 areas, it shouldn't take a whole lot of time to review the document. You can either email us your comments, and I've sent email to the list, so my email should be easily available there. Or if you really want to be nice to us, there's a spreadsheet that we normally take comments on, and if you use the spreadsheet to put comments in, then it's easy to slurp it into our comment handling tool.
Thank you, Pat. And I understand if you want to review it, you'll need to get a password to have access to the IEEE document. I believe Pat can provide that.
Your chairs have the password, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So for the purpose of the discussion we had this week, a couple days ago, we acknowledged that the split NVE work is happening and sort of put that as perhaps one of the more successful, obvious choices, and moved on to focus on the other areas of a control plane. We had a good discussion about whether we needed to define a control plane strictly for NVA to NVE. Obviously, we need that component, but a discussion around making that control plane scale and whether there was an NVA to NVA control plane aspect that we needed to document as well. The consensus seemed to be that we really need to talk about both, and so that's something we should have a working group discussion on. The consensus of that smaller group was pretty clear. So in that context of having identified NVA to NVA control plane and NVA to NVE control plane, we started documenting, basically trying to make a list of protocols. I am certain that this is not complete. We also had some debate around how we actually define these. For example, someone said BGP, and well, what exactly does that mean? Is it eVPN, L2 VPN, et cetera? So there's some discussion about that. We talked about Lisp, and depending on whether you're talking about NVA to NVA or NVA to NVE, what aspect of the Lisp protocol you might use. We had a good discussion about OVSDB, and there are multiple ways that people use OVSDB, different schemas, some of which are not documented openly, some are. So we need to have some more discussion around what that means if we were to use OVSDB as a control plane. So there's some ambiguity, but this is the list we came up with yesterday or 2 days ago. So the question then is, well, what's next? So we kind of came up with a list of protocols that might fit here that we know people have used, but we as a working group need to figure out what we do with that information. Aaliyah looks confused or concerned?
I think just tired. So I was just looking back at the charter, and as you might recall, the last time we rechartered, we did put out of scope the NVA to NVA piece of this because the working group was not making progress and getting very grumpy at each other about it, and because there are the EVPN and L3 VPN solutions that are happening in BESS, which can easily apply. So while I'd be quite open to documents or drafts that think about or describe how to reuse those protocols, I'd really be fascinated to hear any arguments about the need to do something different in that distributed control plane space. The NVA to NVE and so on, you know, that's for the logically centralized NVA. We had this discussion at extreme length.
Yeah, I
Thanks.
recall. So I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. If anyone was helping make this argument, and I actually don't see several people that were there on Tuesday, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the gist of it was, well, if you're talking about BGP or you're talking about, let's say, some other kind of protocol, what assumptions do you have around what NVAs, if you have multiple NVAs, what they know or don't know? So I know there's some relationship there that we probably have to discover or document.
Yeah, it might be something like an applicability. This is how you apply, and this is how you apply L3 VPN in this scope, and these are the pieces it solves and what it doesn't, and how you plug in the rest.
Yeah. So next step. So I think we had a good discussion on Tuesday. Based on that discussion, it's pretty clear we need to define some things better. We need more detail to actually say what we mean when we say, for example, BGP or OVSDB or any of those things. So I think we want to start writing it in a draft. That's certainly better than the slides that I've thrown together. And then have a discussion on the mailing list. Obviously, I've already mentioned a couple of these things, but I think we want to talk about specifically, are we missing something? Is there an obvious protocol that people are using that we didn't touch on? I know there are some proprietary protocols people use that we didn't touch on, and I kind of think those are out of scope for this working group, unfortunately. But then, compared to the requirements, is there obviously a control plane that NVO3 wants to adopt as our solution control plane? And that's, as we've experienced with data plane and everything else, that's never an easy discussion. But it's one we ought to have. To make progress in a timely manner, I think we talked a little bit about this. I don't know if it's a concluded suggestion, but we may want to have an interim meeting, design team, something that helps us focus the work. You agree?
Yeah. So maybe if you're interested in contributing to this, go like a show of hands of people who might be interested in contributing to one or more applicability drafts for control plane protocols. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's a good basis for a design team, I think. Please come and see us afterwards. Thank you.
Eric Nordmark says, from the data plane discussion around extensions, there was also this observation that it would be good if the control plane had a mechanism to specify which extensions you support. So that would be something that would need to be added even to something like EVPN or whatever, right? So that might be something that, and I don't know if there's anything like that in the OVSDB schema, but that would be something to look into.
That's a good point. So one thing that I didn't really say explicitly, but I think we ought to do is when we start having this discussion, revive the old requirements documents and sort of reassess based on what we know now if they're complete. And what you just said is a good example of where they might have just been glossed over. So.
Okay, thanks, Benson.
Thank you.
That's great. I need to find. Did you upload the security? Oh, have you got a video? So next up is John with the security. So thanks, John, for stepping in at the last minute to run through this. Do you want?
Coming up.
Yeah, in a minute.
So raise your hand. How many of you love security? Okay. That hasn't been evident in what's been going on. I know that the focus has been on other things. There have been a lot of rather heated discussions and passionate debates about certain things. But if you think about how this stuff is going to be used, a lack of a security focus is going to make a lot of this technology a rather non-starter for most people. There are a lot of interesting use cases for this technology. Some of them might be things like multi-tenancy in a data center environment. They can certainly be certainly instant on and instant off sort of situations, but ultimately, if you're going to be sharing any sort of hardware, you need to be able to provide some level of security that means that I don't have to go talk to a lawyer, or I don't have to worry about my liability because suddenly Coke and Pepsi are sharing some piece of equipment and someone gets a secret formula. So, wow, red screen.
Yeah, we have a bit of a technical issue here.
Visions of Star Trek. So, I mean, the idea is that, because of what had been done, and to be honest, there was some interesting work done in some earlier drafts that have expired. So essentially what this really involves in is a re-engagement and a kind of a reevaluation of those existing documents, a much tighter relationship with those that are actually more focused on security, because in fairness, this is a routing group, and so it's certainly reasonable that necessarily this wouldn't be where all the focus and expertise is in security. But essentially what we have to do is we have to really get on the ball and make sure that we do this right, because essentially if we don't, one of two things is going to happen. Either no one's going to use it, or vendors are going to describe it and implement it on their own, which means that only a very small set of users will use it, or they won't be able to use it with other users. So essentially there's a there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And ultimately, the way I would try to look at this is that if you really want, all the time you spent in meetings, all the time you spent on phone calls, all the time you spent writing or editing drafts, reviewing drafts, if you want what you've done in this working group to really matter to people, for it actually to get used in reality and in the field, this is what we need to focus on. Because without this, it's essentially not going to be a useful technology to most people. And so it's been personally very frustrating for me, the lack of passion or interest that we've seen, and it's not unique to this working group by any means. But I think for this sort of technology, where you are essentially building a technology meant to facilitate multi-tenancy, right? That's kind of what one of the things it's designed for. If you're going to do multi-tenancy, it's you can't just trust that VLANs are going to provide you security.
We're nearly there.
I got to say, I really thought the whole discussion on the list about VGA stuff was like silly. Now I feel bad.
Well,
I can't believe it.
Thank you for some fantastic ad-libbing in there to fill the gap.
Hey, look at that.
And there we go.
Right.
That.
Let's test this, see if it works. Hey, look at that. For those of you that are offended by color, I apologize. Black and white makes me sleepy. So next steps. So as I said, there were 2 drafts before that were expired. It's quite understandable that that this group wouldn't necessarily, by its nature, have a focus on security. However, if we really want to do this, we need to step up and we need to do better. I was hoping it'd be less of an eye chart on the screen. So anyway, so essentially what we need to do is there's a lot of detailed work that needs to be done as far as how do we figure out how we're going to do isolation of different namespaces, what sort of requirements are going to be for the control plane, whether we need a different way to handle VNI identification space. What sort of confidentiality at the data plane as far as going with the TTLS option. There were some other things suggested. Certainly looking at whether you want to just be doing data plane or whether you want to be doing some other things. I mean, there's actually a lot of very interesting decisions that need to be made that not necessarily going to be always showstoppers, but they're just decisions that we need to make, and we need to kind of make them as a group. So we'd like to see some involvement. As you go down the list, some of these things are going to matter more and less to you, and some of these things can be more interesting to you. Hardware friendliness of Mac encrypted transforms, is kind of an interesting topic. But these are all things we need to get to, and we need to start addressing, or we're not going to move this forward.
Tom Mizrahi, Marvell. Just a small comment. IPsec AH has been deprecated.
And so I'm looking at him. I didn't make the slide, so I'm just kidding.
That was the topic that was discussed at the security in the roundtable. So that means we all need to be more up to date with what is happening in security area.
But this is a perfect example of essentially, if you hadn't said that, how many people in the room would have said something or noticed? Probably some percentage of you. But these are the sort of things that are not typically on the edge of the tongue of most people that don't focus on security. So these are the sort of things we need to focus on, and we need to do right, and we need to get help with. So thank you, sir. So needless to say, these security, because I'll tell you what's happening now is people are deploying some of this technology and they think it's secure. I've had discussions with customers where typically it goes over poorly if you're rude to a customer. So, you ask questions like, well, how do you feel about the security? And they go, oh, well, it's great. And you go, well, so do you normally use VLANs for security? And they go, no, of course not. And it makes for some very interesting expectation management problems. And so if we don't do this right, what's going to happen is some customers are going to assume that we did do it right, and they're going to walk blindly off a cliff. We need to start resurrecting some of those drafts, figure out what we can use, what we can't use, clean it up. And as said before, we need to really, really engage on the security expert side of things so that we can get some help with this and do this right. And that's the end.
Okay, thanks, John. Any other comments on the output of that roundtable? I think definitely what we need to do is we've got a security requirements draft, which is currently expired, and that's a pretty lengthy and detailed document, but we certainly need to resurrect that. Yeah, the intention was to take parts of that and put them into the security considerations parts of the solutions, but we didn't have solutions at that time. So yes, at the very least that needs to be resurrected. We need to move forward with actually doing something with that text and taking some of the requirements from that and translating them into solutions. Okay, well, thank you to all of the people who participated in the roundtables and the leads to the roundtables. I think that was worthwhile. One last thing just to finish. Let's talk a little bit about next steps for the working group. So the first thing is the design team output draft. And we will do a working group call for adoption once it's been updated with the some of the conclusions from the discussion group. But today we would also like to get a sense of the room about the conclusion of the design, or the recommendation, in the main recommendation in the design team draft, which is to move forward with draft Geneva as a single standards track data plane encapsulation for NVO3. So we will also do a consensus call on the list. And this is just really just to kind of gauge sense of the room. Sorry, before we.
Yeah, actually, I'm not there to say anything about Genevieve, but I just recently realized through the email that GUI is progressing as well. Yes, but my understanding, it will become a standard as well.
Yeah. So the situation
no. What I'm asking is that, is there a way that teams that work in NVO3 and in INT area collaborate so that at least some decisions that made in NVO3 will be consistent in there? And I'm looking for same consideration that we talk about entropy, we talk about alternative marking, and some other things that benefit everybody.
Atlas. So a point of having a single data plane encapsulation in NVO3 is that everything else builds on top of it. There are lots of encapsulations that the IETF has standardized. L2GPEXT, MPLS. I mean, we can rattle off acronyms all day. I understand that there's interest in INT area for other purposes to use GUI. I certainly would be happy to see lessons learned here communicated to INT area. But the focus is that the work done in NVO3, assuming there is working group consensus to accept the design team's recommendation to use Genève and evolve it as we've discussed, will be focused on Genève.
Tom Mizrahi, just a point of clarification. So assuming we follow the path, do we still plan to publish VXLAN GP as an informational working group document?
Sorry, can you?
Assuming we take the path of Genève, which is currently the what is planned, do we still plan to publish VXLAN GP as an informational working group document?
So once we're finished with the standards track document, then yeah, that's certainly an option for the working group to publish those as informational or experimental. It's not completely closed.
Oh yeah, I think assuming that the authors are interested, that we'd probably want to have a paragraph or so at the beginning explaining that was one of the alternatives that was considered, and have it as an informational.
But since it's a working group document, the authors are less relevant here. The working group is more relevant, right?
Yes, the working group is more relevant. The question is whether there are people who want to do the work to carry it forth to informational, but it will absolutely not be published as informational before the standards track proposal proceeds and is published as an RFC.
So I don't have a strong opinion about which protocol we pick. I do generally agree we should pick one. The one thing I'm a little, I struggle with a little bit is that one of the criteria for picking ought to be implementations. And I know that there are implementations of all of these protocols, but I don't know which one has maybe more implementations or is more commonly deployed. Is there some way we can gather that feedback at least from my point of view, I'd feel more comfortable picking one after we know that.
So we did actually have questions like that raised in the working group over the years, and of course all the draft authors came back and had presentations saying, yeah, we have 3 or 4 or 5 implementations of this. So we have tried. The other more formal approach is to do implementation reports and describe those implementations and the experience in a more detailed way. We would really like to make some progress though on picking one, and to be honest, if we were going to do that, we probably should have done it a couple of years ago. I mean, I think that as long as there are some implementations, interoperable implementations, all the authors of all the drafts have claimed that. So at this stage, I think it would be difficult to make a choice based on just implementation. However, it would certainly, in the future, if this went to internet standard, of course, it would be necessary to get some idea of the more detailed idea of implementation experience. Okay, so just to sum up, can I get a show of hands of those who agree with moving forward with Draft Geneve as a single standards track data plane solution for NVO3. If you could raise your hand, please, if you agree with that conclusion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. About 15 or something. Yeah. Okay. Can you raise your hand if you disagree with Draft Geneve being move forward as? If you disagree, yes. Okay, none. Great. Can we get a show of hands if you honestly don't care and just want to go and get a beer or bits and bites? Good. Okay, so we'll try and reaffirm that on the list, and if that goes to, if there's consensus for that, obviously we'd like the authors of Draft Geneve to update that document, and then we'll hopefully at some point. So we have a milestone, I think, for August this year to hand over the to working group last call, and hopefully send that to the ISG. One thing that's missing on this slide is progressing the OEM work, and as I mentioned on Tuesday, we will do a call for adoption in NVO3 for those 2 OEM drafts. And as we discussed today, we'd also really like to see some more progress on the control plane. So I know a few people put their hands up saying they'll be willing to work on drafts or a draft on applicability of control planes to NVO3. So that's great. Please drop us an email and we'll try and form. I think that probably a good way to do this is to form some kind of informal design team around that to make some fairly rapid progress. Okay, and with that, thank you very much. I think, any other comments? I think we're done. Great, thank you.
Has anyone not signed the blue sheets?